Good evening, everyone. We are continuing on our study in the book of First Samuel. And today we're doing chapter 23. We are in a sequence of narratives that describes how Saul is pursuing David, and David has so far managed to escape Saul. Now, at this point in time, David is kept in a stronghold. Verse 1, then they told David, Behold, behold means look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are plundering the threshing floors. Now, Keilah is a place in Judah. We can actually recognize this place somewhere in Joshua chapter 15 verse 44. That's where we first read of this place, and this is a place where it is in the Judah territory city, and the Philistines are coming into this location or this city. They are plundering. Now the word plundering here, literally they're coming in to take, to rob. I think that would be a good word. To rob, to take by force. Now understand that David is going to be the next king. He is faced with situations where his own people are threatened by the enemies. And so this chapter is actually a series of reflection how David, in his kingly personality, is to address all these situations as a king. And then you will see the contrast between David and Saul. Now, at this point in time, Saul is still king, and David is, well, I guess you can say king to be. We have the enemies. The enemies are the Philistines. Keilah would be the Israelites from Judah, and they are being robbed of their harvest. Now, verse 2, we have to look at this a bit carefully. It says, David inquired of the Lord. And let's read the way that that David had inquired of God, and they will break it down. It says, shall I go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and deliver Keilah. The word deliver here would also means go and save Keilah. And this would be a picture of short type of questions. It's the type of questions that I want to draw your attention to. These are short questions, or questions, the character of the questions, right? These are questions with very short answers. Basically, what we see here is all these reply is literally a yes or no type of question answer. Now, we'll talk about this a little later when we get there. But this is the manner that David inquired of God. Now, what do you mean inquire? This really is to, I guess you could say that David consulted the Lord. Now, this is an important word. How do you consult God? It's not by prayer in this way, because prayer, they would say that David would have prayed or interceded. But in this case, it's between David and God himself. And he is checking with God. Now, this is an important aspect of a king, always checking with God in how to handle some of these situations where he is not quite sure. It is not a situation where David always turns to God as if he doesn't know how to run a country. As he's the king to be, he has enormous wisdom. But this time round, it is with regards to battle. And every time there is a battle, it is traditional and it is the practice where they would always consult God. And this is the word sha'al, to consult God with these yes or no answers. Now, it is not that God gives short answers. We will soon see how David made the inquiry or consultation of God. Shall I go? Shall I go and attack these Philistines, defend Keilah? And the answer is yes, go do it. Right? So it's a yes, no type answer. Now, we'll come back to this later on because there are a number of instances, and then we are then told exactly how this is done. Verse 3, David's men said to him, says, behold, look, we are very afraid here in Judah. How much more than if we go to Keilah against the ranks of the Philistines? The people here were afraid, and this is a fact. They are hiding, right? They are hiding from Saul. Because they know that if Saul were to find them, that would be the end of everything. So why go to Keilah? Why expose themselves? And that would be the idea of verse 3. Next, David inquired of the Lord once more. This is in verse 4. This one more time, basically. One more time. And this is about inquiry. So I just highlight to you that this is the same word, sha'al. And what did God say? God says, and the Lord answered him and says, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hands. And this is a confirmation of success. Because God is with them, there is God fighting with them. And God says, I will give the Philistines into your hands. So if you go back and recall all the situations, say in the book of Deuteronomy, right, chapter 2, you find that when they were at the land of Edom, God told Moses, I am not giving you this land. Edom belongs to Esau, your descendants. When it came to Moab and Ammon, God says, I'm not giving you this land because it is to your relatives. But once it passed Ammon, they went into the land of the Amorites. And God says, I will give the land into your hands. Now, this is that concept. The idea of giving is not that God is going to wrap this in a bow and ribbon and says, nah, you can have it. It is a manner of speaking that God says, yes, when you fight, you will have success and you will win over the Philistines. Why? It's because God is going to get involved in that battle. And so David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines. And the result was he led away their livestock, all their, well, in that case, you would say that these are the livestock that came with the Philistines because of a long-term battle. They have to bring their own food, right? And struck them with a great slaughter, a great blow. Or you can call this a great blow, a great slaughter. Basically, these are all technical words of fighting. It's like boxing, like you give the person a jab and the person hits back at you. This is the kind of language that's being used here, and a big blow. And thus David rescued the inhabitants of Keilah. This is rescue. And that was what God wanted them to do, go and rescue them. And so the role of David is one of a savior, if you can call it that way. And he is here to deliver, to save. And you see this whole picture in this first few verses. Verse 6, now it came about when Aviatar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, that he came down with an ephod in his hand. This whole picture here in verse 20, chapter 23, verse 6, talks about when Aviatar actually came to David. Now, this happened in chapter 22, verse 20, when he escaped Doeg. He left and he fled after David. He went to where David was. And after Saul had killed all the Lord's priests, and you find this fled to David at Keilah, would be in the time, I would say in the time of 1 Samuel, chapter 22, verse 20. Now, this is somewhat of what we call a parenthesis. A parenthesis. A parenthesis essentially is basically describing an event that has nothing to do with what has happened from verse 1 to verse 5. It was inserted in there to describe how David managed to consult, right? To consult the Lord. The idea of David managing to consult the Lord when was through the Aviatar. Aviatar is the one that has an ephod in his hand. It is said that with an ephod, he would have the Umim and Tumim. And the narrative is written in such a way that halfway through the narrative, you see Aviatar with that. But basically, the way that is being described is David already had Keilah with him. David already had Aviatar with him in 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 20. And when David went to Keilah, you find that Aviatar did not go with them. It was only after the Keilah was delivered that Aviatar came as well. So this is what we would call a parenthesis in terms of describing how David consulted God using the Umim and Tumim. Now, Umim and Tumim is two very mysterious stones that they use to seek God or consult God. And one would give you a yes/no answer, and the other one basically would tell you how else is a yes/no. It's a very short type of question. That's why I wanted us to understand the way that it is being consulted of God is because they were using the Umim and Tumim, understanding what God would say through the lots that of the rocks that they're using. So that is chapter 23, verse 6, giving us a parenthesis, a clue as to how David consulted God. Verse 7. When it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, Saul said, "Wow, this is great." He says, "God has delivered him into my hand, for he shut himself by entering a city with double gates and bars." Now, this is what Saul said. And oftentimes you find that people ascribe to God many things. And so it is a manner of saying, because Saul couldn't believe himself that David was technically or practically handed over to him in a platter for shutting himself entering the city of Keilah with gates and bars, meaning there is no way for David to escape if Saul were to go after David. And so this is what is said, that God, how should we say, it says that God recognized. It doesn't mean that God has delivered. He thinks of it as God has given him into my hand. This phrase here, it says that uh, Saul regarded, right? God, Saul regarded as if, right? And I would put it this way, as if God uh, that God had placed into placed David into his hand. Now this is roughly how the Hebrew would be stating this. So the idea is of Saul saying, God has delivered him into my hands, basically is telling us that Saul, in Saul's mind, right? In Saul's mind, he thinks that God has done it. He thinks, right? It's not that God actually delivered, but it is in the mind of Saul that he's talking to himself in that sense. So the English is a bit not so clear, but so I trust that we would understand that it is Saul who is thinking that God is the one that seems to have given him David. Verse 8, so Saul summoned all the people. Let's go to battle. Go down to Keilah and besiege David and his men. Now, in the good old days, when you have a city, right? When you have a city and you have gates, what they do is they besiege the city, where they would surround, and then there's no way in and no way out, because there's only one in and one out. And that is why Saul liked this idea, because if David is in there, it is for sure David will be captured. But that is what Saul is thinking. Well, God must have done this. But do you realize that God had already said, I don't want you to be king? And Samuel had already said, I'm not going to come and see you again. And there is at no time that Saul ever attempted to consult God. And even if he did, God wouldn't have responded to him like the way God responded to David. And so in the first few verses, David had consulted God, and that is a demonstration of a kingly behavior, looking at God in terms of battle. And so when Saul summoned all the people for war, there was no consultation, because he is now acting on his own behalf. Now, David knew In verse 9, David knew that Saul was plotting evil against him and said to Abiathar, the priest, bring the ephod here. Let's break this down a little bit. There is some challenge. How did David know? Now, all these words, David knew, doesn't mean that David suddenly had an insight and some news popped into his mind. The idea of know really gives us the idea of learn, right? Learned about. Learned about would be this word new here, right? That he became acquainted. Right? This is the idea of know in this case. It is not something that was supernaturally dropped into the mind of David. So David learned about Saul plotting evil. Now understand, evil. In this case, Ra'ah is evil. Now understand that evil is from the view of the eyes of the beholder. Always remember, Tov and Ra, good and evil, doesn't mean moral. So do not jump the conclusion that it has to be moral. Evil is a situation where in the eyes of the beholder, things that it is not good, not agreeable, right? It is hurtful. So how do we understand this evil? Saul was plotting something evil against David. So it's David, right? Him is David. And so from the eyes of David, what Saul was doing is planning something that is not good in David's eyes. Something that David is not agreeable to, something that would be hurtful to David. Now, that is how we would understand evil. This is a very Hebrew term, so that we do not jump to conclusions every time we hear the word evil or good, because it has everything to do with how a person is looking at the thing. Now, if you think about it, in the eyes of Saul, it is good. But in the eyes of David, it is evil. And that is how good and evil is seen from the eyes or the perspective of the one who is looking at things. Verse 10, then David said, what is David trying to do? David is consulting God using the Umim and Tumim. He says, oh Lord God of Israel, your servant has heard. That was how David knew. How David knew. He heard for certain that Saul is seeking to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Well, the idea of destroy right here is to ruin the city. That when you come and attack a city, well, you in fact, what you do is you will actually destroy the city, right? Destroy the city on my account because of David, right? Because of David. Verse 11, will the men of Keilah surrender me? Now, this word here, surrender me, literally means to deliver him up, right? Surrender me is to deliver him well, I guess in modern times, close him up and hand over to Saul? That is the question now. That is the question. Will Saul come down just as your servant has heard? Will Saul actually come down? Will the men of Keilah give me up into his hand? O Lord of Israel, I pray, tell your servant. Remember, all these are via the Umim and Tumim. It is not via a prayer. And so the Lord says he will come down. So Saul will come down. So we have answer number one. Saul will come down. Then David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? This is the second question. Give them up. And the Lord said, they will surrender you. And so if you think about it, these kind of questions in two stones, right? It is like, it's like it's like Aviatar had to do something with the stone to get a yes no answer, or to have a sign of which the rock will turn in a particular way. It's like rolling dice in some sense, but it will fall according to how God would want the answer to be. This way you find that God says they will give you up. So you get this kind of a Q&A, I guess, with God, and that would be the consultation. So what did David do? After hearing all of these, the first time, go and fight the Philistines, and God is going to give them into your hands. Now, will Saul come and will you be delivered? God says, yes, these men will give you up. Doesn't matter, you have saved them. They do not value that. They value their lives. So David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go, meaning they are trying to find, this is trying to find a safe haven. When it was told that of Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the pursuit, meaning before Saul arrived, Saul already found out. So one of the interesting things you have noticed up to verse 13 is their communication and their battle intelligence is extremely good. They would have eyes all over the place, would have spotted things, would have heard things. And so Saul was able to hear of David. David was able to hear of Saul. And so in such a situation, you find that both of these are very good warriors of battle. Very good warriors of battle. Verse 14. So David stayed in the wilderness or in the strongholds. These are all the places where they could hide and they could defend themselves and remain in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph. Verse 14, these are the mountainous areas. And you find that strongholds gives us a picture where it is like a fort. It's not a fort, but it's like a fort. It's in the high places, so they can defend themselves well. They have the rocks to hide, and so they can actually ambush the enemies. So this is basically the idea of stronghold, and so they stayed there because it seemed to be very safe in that sense, right? Very safe in that sense. Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hands. Now, the word deliver here is to give. Now, I have mentioned this to you before. When God gave the Israelites the land of the Ammonites, Moses went and conquered, including Bashan with King Og, but not to take Edom, not to take Moab, and not to take Ammon. So this is the idea. When God did not give into the hands, like how God gave the Philistines into the hands of David, Saul will never be successful. This basically means that Saul will never be successful because God is intervening in that sense, if you want to say it. God is blocking Saul's effort of looking for David. Verse 15, now David became aware that Saul had come out to seek his life while David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh. So you notice, became aware is another word. This word here literally means to see, right? It literally means to perceive, become aware, perceive, right? Uh, and I guess you can also say that he actually learned about Saul coming out to seek his life, where he is at that point in time. Now, how did we know? Verse 16 onwards. Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David at Horesh and encouraged him in the Lord. This is how Jonathan, who loved David as his own nephesh, as his own being, right? David is like himself. And so when Jonathan allowed David to leave, they were both crying because they probably never see each other again. And now Jonathan found out that David was at Horesh hiding, and he went to him. The idea of encourage him in God is a word to strengthen, right? To make strong. This is an idea where, knowing that he has been running all around for his dear life, that he would have waned in his spirit, he would have weakened. And so Jonathan went out, and so the English word encourage is actually a good word to use, but literally it's really to strengthen him in God, to continue in God. And what did he say? Notice what he said in verse 17. Thus he says to him, says, do not be afraid. Do not fear. This word is fear. Do not fear. Because the hand of Saul, my father, will not find you. And more importantly is the confirmation or the affirmation that you will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you because we are together. After all, I love you with like my nefesh. So if you're king, I'll be just next door, not standing next to you. And finally, you find that these words are also ringing true. And Saul, my father, knows that also. What does that mean? It means that knows this, also, knows this is true, right? Knows this is true. This is the meaning here, that Saul also knows this is true. And the intent of killing David is to prevent David from being king. But at this point in time, all these things that are written for us to read is so that we understand the character of Saul, why God has discarded him, the character of David, why God is protecting him, the character of Jonathan, why that bond between Jonathan and David is one not as just bosom buddies, but one that has to do with matters of life and death. Right? Next. Verse 18, so the two of them made another covenant before the Lord. And David stayed at Horesh while Jonathan went back to his house. Verse 19, then Ziphites came up to Saul at Gibeah. Who are the Ziphites? That's the people who are in the land that in the area that David was hiding. And so they came up to Saul and says, hey, guess what? Is David not hiding with us in the strongholds at Horesh on the hill of Hakilah, which is on the south of Yeshimon? These are Yeshimon, basically to tell Saul, this is where your enemy is. Just as the people of Keilah were willing to surrender David to Saul, the Ziphites, the people of Ziphites, were willing to sell him out. Now then, O king, come down according to all the desire of your soul to do so. So what does this mean? The desire means, you could say the pleasure of your nefesh, because you want to kill him. Go ahead. Our part to give him into your hands, to surrender him into your hands. So you find that generally the people that David was hiding were not honorable in that sense. And Saul said to the Ziphites, says, may you be blessed of the Lord, for you have compassion on me. May God bless you, basically, because you have chamal. Chamal may be understood as pity. You have pity on me, or you are sparing me the agony of not able to kill David. This is the way that it would be understood. Verse 22, go now, make more sure, be firm. That's what it means, right? The word be firm here, it is to, let's say, to be firm, make more sure. I guess the English is okay. To establish it, to make doubly sure, I guess, in our own local words, and investigate. Investigate is to know, to find out. This word is know. And then the next one is and see. See is literally to view it, to inspect it, and this is to look at. So you find that this is an A, this is an A, and this is a B. Investigate and see. Investigate is to yada. See is ra'a. Basically, this is what it means to be more sure. You go and check it out, find out so that you know. So knowledge is gained by investigation. Go and check it out. That's how knowledge is acquired in the Hebrew sense. Very practical, very concrete. And then if you can look at it, the moment you can look at it, you can see. So that's what it means. His place where his haunt is. And who has seen him there? For I'm told that he is very cunning. Very cunning is the word arum, like the serpent in the garden, very arum. His haunt, by the way, literally means where his foot is, right? His foot. The English use the word haunt. I'm not quite sure how it may relate in the old days, but this word literally means go and see where he has placed his foot. If you can see his foot there, then that is sure, right? That is what it means, that you are now firm. So you notice the description is actually very vivid. So look and learn. Again, look and learn is to see and know. Same thing here. Investigate, see. Know and see. See and know. It's a repeat of that about all the hiding places where he hides himself. Come back to me with clarity that you are firm, right? You are firm, that you have seen him. Then I will go with you, and if he's in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah. Now, what do you mean, all the thousands of Judah? You can see this in expressions like in Micah. The idea of the thousands of Judah, that wherever he may hide amongst the people, I will find him, right? I will find him. Verse 24. Then they arose. These are the people from Ziph, and went to the face of Saul. Basically, they are like leaving, right? They're leaving. Now David and his men, 600 of them, were in the wilderness of Maon, in the Arava, south of Yeshimon. This is another place. When Saul and his men went to seek him, they told David, and he came down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon, which means that from Ziph he has already gone away. And then notice, Saul has very good intelligence, and Saul heard it. He gave chase. He pursued. Now, the word pursue here is to chase after. Chase after, or chase behind. So it's very vivid, right? You cannot chase in front, you can only chase behind. And so this is what it means, is to pursue, chase from behind, chasing David in the wilderness of Maon. Verse 26, Saul went on one side of the mountain, David and his men on the other side of the mountain. Now, if you think of it this way, if this was the hill, then you would have Saul on this side, and then you would have David on the other side. They don't see each other, right? They don't see each other. And David was hurrying to get away from Saul, for Saul and his men were surrounding David to seize him. The idea of seizing him is to catch hold of him. Catch hold of him, right? It is to seize. Well, you can say arrest, if you like that word. Basically, to take hold of him. Verse 27, but a messenger came to Saul. So how did Saul hear all this? There are a lot of messengers. Malak, right? Commonly translated as angels as well. But a messenger came to Saul saying, hurry, and come, for the Philistines have made a raid on the land. Where did he come from? From the headquarters, right? From the palace, from where they were originally situated. Saul is not there. Saul is busy chasing David. So while he was busy, the Philistines came to make a raid on the land. Now, what do you mean make a raid? This word make a raid basically tells him that they're coming to strip the land, right? They're coming to invade the land, to take things away, right? To make a raid means to dash in and of course out. So this was a situation that is now going to disturb Saul, and he has to stop. So Saul returned from pursuing David, stopped the chase, and went to meet the Philistines. Therefore, they called the place the Rock of Escape. Now, what does that mean, the Rock of Escape? This literally means Selah, Selah Ha Mahlakot. This is a place where, well, it's not so much as escape, I guess. This is already translated escape, but the actual word here means a separation. I think would be a good word to use. A division, or separation. Meaning, when they were about to get hold of David, remember they were at this hill, right? And then you have Saul on this side, and then you have David on the other side. Saul was about to encircle David. And while that was happening, you find the messenger coming saying, quick, let's go. The Philistines are coming. And so Saul had to leave. So what really happened is Saul had to abandon this. And Saul then had to go back and deal with the problems. This is what it means by this word escape, mahaloket. Which is actually a separation, a division from danger. And so, yeah, you can actually say that, yes, it is a place where the danger had separated from David. Saul was diverted. Philistines invaded the land. Do you think God has a hand in it, a way to protect David? Possibly, possibly. It's not stated in the text. It's not stated in the text. Some people say it's a coincidence, but I guess since it's in this text, I would tend to agree that behind this, the silent hand of God had come to give David a chance to run away. I think so, because God has said that he will not give David into the hands of Saul. And it's very near already, almost getting David, and yet he couldn't. And yes, I tend to agree that that might be the case. And with this, we will end here, although there's one more verse that's in the next chapter, but it's okay. We will continue tomorrow.